He had given orders that ended wars. He had walked through fire and never flinched. He had buried men he loved and kept moving, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. But nothing, not a single battlefield, not a single loss, not a single night in a foreign country staring at a ceiling and wondering if he still had a soul, had ever brought Darian Cole to his knees the way 3 sick toddlers and 1 exhausted nanny did on a Thursday night in December. The black truck cut through the fog like something that didn't belong in peaceful neighborhoods. Darian sat in the passenger seat, eyes straight ahead, hands resting on his thighs like weapons waiting. His jacket was wrinkled. His jaw hadn't been shaved in 4 days. There were 14 missed calls on his phone from his business partners, men who needed him, men who depended on him. He stared at the screen and felt absolutely nothing. He had been good at that, feeling nothing. He had practiced it for years until it became his resting state, his armor, his religion. He hadn't been home in 3 months, not because the work kept him away, though that was the story he told. The truth was simpler and uglier. Walking through that front door meant walking into the version of himself that Camille had loved. Camille, his wife, gone 16 months now. A brain aneurysm, fast and merciless, the kind that gave no warning and no goodbye. She had kissed him on a Tuesday morning, told him dinner would be ready by 7, and was gone before he could make it back from the airport. The twins, Eli and Ezra, and their baby sister June had just turned 2 when it happened. They were 3 now. Growing in rooms he barely entered, learning words he hadn't heard for the first time, becoming people he was terrified to know. He told himself distance was protection. In his world, attachment created vulnerability. The people you loved became leverage in the hands of your enemies. He paid every bill without question. He hired only the best people. He convinced himself that money was a form of love, that provision was presence. It wasn't. He knew it wasn't. He just didn't know what else he had to give. Across the city, inside the house he was driving toward, a single lamp burned in the upstairs hallway. Elena Voss had not slept. She was sitting on the floor of the twins' room, back against Ezra's bed frame, a wet cloth in her hand, and a thermometer on the carpet beside her. All 3 children had fevers. June had been the worst, up since midnight, crying in that hollow, exhausted way that meant she had run out of tears but not out of pain. Elena had been holding her for 2 hours before June finally went still. Now she sat in the quiet and let herself fall apart just slightly, just enough to breathe. She pressed her knuckles against her mouth and exhaled through her nose. 1 more hour, she told herself. Just hold on 1 more hour. Before we go any further, do you think a man like Darian Cole is capable of learning how to love again? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. The front door opened without a sound. Darian had a habit of moving quietly through spaces, something trained into him long before he understood why. He stepped into the hallway and stopped. The lamp at the top of the stairs cast a pale gold light across the landing, and through the open door he could see her. Elena was on the floor, forehead resting against the side of Ezra's bed, shoulders moving in the careful rhythm of someone crying without permission. The children were finally still in their beds, but their faces were flushed even from the doorway. He could see it. Something moved through his chest that he didn't have a name for. His hand found the doorframe. He had stood in rooms where lives were decided and not felt this. He had signed papers that changed the shape of entire industries and not felt this. 3 feverish children and 1 woman quietly breaking on a nursery floor reached into the sealed place inside him and pulled. He stepped in. Elena scrambled upright, nearly knocking over the thermometer, eyes wide, 1 hand pressed flat against her sternum like she needed to hold herself together. "Mr. Cole," she breathed, "I didn't know you were coming. I wasn't expecting. Are they sick?" His voice was low. Not cold exactly, but careful the way his voice always was when something was happening underneath it. Elena opened her mouth. Her chin did the thing it did when she was trying not to cry again. "Elena." Softer this time, almost unrecognizable. "Tell me what happened." She looked at him, steady for a moment despite everything. Then she said, "They've had fevers since yesterday. June was the worst. They're stable now, the doctor came this afternoon. But they were asking for you, Mr. Cole. They ask for you every night, but tonight when June couldn't stop crying, she kept saying, 'Daddy, Daddy,' like saying it enough times would make you appear, and I just..." Her voice dissolved. I didn't know what to tell her anymore. Darian stood completely still. Then he crossed the room, sat on the edge of June's bed, and rested one large, careful hand against his daughter's forehead. She stirred slightly. Her tiny fingers closed around one of his, reflexive and trusting, the way children's hands do when they sense safety before they're even awake. He did not move. He stayed. Morning arrived pale and uncomfortable. Darian was at the kitchen table in the same clothes, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him, staring at the grain of the wood. Elena moved through the kitchen without speaking, making breakfast, keeping her eyes on what her hands were doing, performing the practiced quiet of someone who knew how to make themselves small around large and complicated people. He spoke first. "You don't have to do that," he said. She turned. "Do what, sir? Make yourself invisible in your own kitchen." He wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at the table. "Last night," he said, "that wasn't your job." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very evenly, "With respect, sir, neither is being the only adult these children can count on. But that's been the reality for months." The silence between them had weight. He looked up slowly. His eyes were exactly what she expected, guarded, assessing, the eyes of a man who trusted nothing quickly. "You're not afraid of me," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was almost a question. She held his gaze. "No, sir." Then she turned back to the stove. She heard him exhale behind her. The children came downstairs 10 minutes later, still warm from sleep, still slightly washed out from the fevers, but moving, alive themselves. Eli spotted his father first and stopped completely. Then June said, "Daddy," with the uncomplicated certainty of a child who has not yet learned to protect herself from hope, and she walked directly to him and climbed into his lap without asking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Darian sat very still, arms coming around her slowly, like a man remembering a language he hadn't spoken in years. Elena kept her eyes on the eggs. She did not let him see that she was holding her breath. He told himself he would leave by lunchtime. Then he told himself after dinner. Then it was dark and the children were bathed and in bed, and he was still there, standing in the hallway, not quite sure how it had happened. He watched Elena that day the way he watched everything, carefully, with attention paid to what she didn't say as much as what she did. She noticed that Ezra needed things explained twice before they stuck, and she never showed impatience. She let June pick the song at bath time even when she clearly wanted the whole thing to be over. When Eli got frustrated with a puzzle and threw pieces across the floor, Elena simply sat down next to him, said nothing, and started gathering them up until he joined her. At one point, Eli brought Darian a drawing. A tall brown figure with big hands, standing beside 3 small figures and a woman with yellow hair even though Elena's hair was dark brown. Darian stared at it. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing to the yellow-haired figure. "Elena," Eli said like it was obvious. "She lives here. She stays." His voice was matter-of-fact, the way children's voices are when they're stating things they believe to be permanently true. Darian folded the drawing once, carefully, and put it in his jacket pocket. Across the room, Elena was wiping down the counter with her back to him. Her hand had gone still. Later, when the house was quiet, he stopped her in the hallway. She looked up at him in the dim light and waited. "Why do you stay?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. "Because they need consistency more than they need anything money can buy," she said. "And because every child deserves at least one person who shows up, every single time." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked away without another word. But she noticed his shoulders had dropped just slightly, like something had released. Things in this house are shifting in ways nobody planned. What do you think is really happening inside Darian Cole right now? Tell us in the comments. We want to know. His head of operations, Marcus, found him in the study 3 days later and set a file on the desk without preamble. "You asked me to vet everyone in this house when they were hired," Marcus said. "I did, but I think you need to read the full picture." Darian read it alone. The file on Elena Voss, 26 years old, former pediatric home care nurse, left her position 18 months ago following the death of her infant son, Noah, a premature birth, complications the doctors said were unsurvivable from the start. No partner listed. No emergency contact after her mother passed. She had applied for the nanny position 19 days after burying him. Darian read that line 3 times. 19 days after she buried her son, she came to care for his children. He set the file down and sat with that for a long time. He thought about the way she pressed her lips to June's forehead when she thought no one was watching. The way she whispered, "I've got you," in the dark, like it was also something she needed someone to say to her. The way she had arrived here with a grief so large it should have flattened her and had somehow turned it into a reason to stay instead of leave. He found her on the back porch that evening after the children were asleep. He sat beside her without announcement, without asking. A long silence held between them, neither one rushing it. Then he said, "I read your file today." Her hands tightened around her mug. "All of it," he said. "I'm sorry about Noah." She turned to look at him and something in her face opened, just a fraction, the way a door does when someone finally knocks correctly. She didn't speak for a moment. "He would have been 2 in March," she said quietly. "Same age as June." Darian said nothing. He did not move away, and in the space where words failed, something true passed between them. The storm came on a Friday. Power went out just after 8, and all 3 children woke in the dark screaming. Alina was in the room in seconds, Darian right behind her, and without discussion or planning they simply moved. Alina gathered June, murmuring softly against her hair. Darian sat on Eli's bed and pulled both boys against him, one on each side, large arms around small bodies, awkward and perfect and real. He had no idea what he was doing. It did not matter. They calmed because he was there. When the crying settled, they all ended up on the floor together under a blanket with a flashlight propped against the wall. Eli demanded a story. Darian looked at Alina. Alina looked at him and pressed her lips together. "They're your kids," she whispered, eyes dancing even in the near dark. He looked genuinely panicked, and she had to turn away to compose herself. So he told them about a soldier who was very brave on the outside but forgot, for a while, that real bravery was coming home. 3 dragons helped him remember. The dragons were very bossy, and one of them had her mother's laugh. The children were asleep before he finished. The flashlight glowed softly between them. His shoulder was almost touching hers. "You're different than I thought you'd be," he said quietly. "How did you think I'd be?" she asked. "Someone I could keep at a distance," he admitted. There was a long pause. She looked down at the sleeping children. He looked at the ceiling. She stayed. It was his mother who arrived without warning on a Wednesday and dismantled the fragile thing that had been growing. She moved through the house like an audit, found Alina within minutes, looked at her the way someone looks at something they've already decided is a problem. She pulled Darian into the study within the hour. "This woman is building dependency," his mother said, voice measured and sharp. "She lost a child and now she's attaching herself to yours. She's attaching herself to you. You're a wealthy man in a vulnerable state, Darian. She knows exactly what she's doing. Open your eyes." He said nothing, but the seed was planted, and in the soil of a man who had spent his life watching for betrayal, it grew overnight. He called Alina into the study the next morning. His face had closed again, the way a building closes after hours, everything locked and lightless. "I need to ask you something honestly," he said. "Go ahead," she said. "Are you here because of Noah? Are my children standing in for something you lost? Are you using this grief to build something else?" The room went very still. Alina looked at him for a long moment. The glisten in her eyes was not weakness. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and exact. "I understand why someone told you that," she said, "and I understand why you listened. But I love your children because they are extraordinary people who deserve to be loved. Not because they fill a shape that belongs to someone else." She reached into her pocket, placed a folded piece of paper on his desk, and walked out. The paper was a resignation letter, already written. She had known. Somehow she had known this moment existed. The house changed immediately and horribly. June stopped talking at mealtimes. Eli stood at the front window every morning with his shoes on, as if waiting were the same as doing something. Ezra began asking where Alina was with a frequency that became its own kind of grief. Darian moved through the rooms like a man who had done something he already understood was irreversible and was still hopping to be wrong. He called Marcus. "Find out who spoke to my mother before she came here. Find out what she was offered and by whom." The answer came back in 3 hours. A rival, a man who had been watching Darian for months, had made contact with his mother. The strategy was precise, surgically emotional. Isolate him. Remove his stability. Watch him destabilize from the inside. The maid they had assessed correctly was his only source of something close to peace. Remove her and he would unravel. He had handed it to them with both hands. Darian sat in the nursery alone that night holding the drawing Eli had made. The tall brown figure with large hands, the three small figures, the woman with the yellow hair. He held it and understood slowly and completely what he had thrown away and why, and the understanding was not gentle. He drove to her apartment at midnight. Rain on the windshield, city lights blurring through the glass. He sat outside for 7 minutes. He didn't have words prepared. He had never been built for prepared words. He walked to her door, and when she opened it, still in her coat like she hadn't fully arrived home yet, he said, "Ezra asked for you 4 times at dinner. June slept with her shoes on because she said she was ready in case you came back. And he stopped, started again. I owe you an apology that I don't have language good enough for, but I'm here, and I'm asking." A long silence. Then she said, "Is that the only reason you came?" His jaw held. His eyes didn't move from hers. "No," he said, "it's not the only reason." She came back not because he was powerful, or because the house was beautiful, or because the salary was generous. She came back because of 3 children who loved her without conditions, and because of the way he had stood at her door in the rain and told the truth at the cost of his pride. The reunion in the hallway was chaos and joy, and loud in a way the house hadn't been in months. June reached Alina first and held on with the full force of her small body. The twins collided with her from both sides, and all 3 were laughing and crying in that beautiful tangled way that children do when relief becomes physical. Alina held them tight with her eyes closed, saying, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here," until it became a lullaby. Darian stood back and watched his home come alive. Then Eli pulled away from Alina, ran to his father, grabbed his hand with both of his own, and pulled him into the middle of all of it. And Darian did not resist. He folded into the group like he had always belonged there, because he had just been too afraid to know it. Months moved through that house the way good months do, quietly and permanently. Darian learned which cereal Ezra refused to eat, and which songs made June fall asleep fastest, and how to sit with Eli through a thunderstorm without either of them needing to say anything. Alina never pushed. She never performed patience. She simply existed in the house as herself, warm and honest and real, and love came the way all true things do, not announced, not dramatic, just suddenly and obviously present. He found her one night in the kitchen, a photograph face up on the table, a baby boy with closed eyes and a hospital blanket. He sat beside her without a word. She didn't explain and he didn't ask. He just stayed, the way she had stayed for him, the way staying had always been the only thing that ever meant anything. One evening in early spring, he found her on the porch watching the sky go soft and dark. He sat beside her and was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I don't know how to say things beautifully. I never have." She smiled without looking at him. "I know, but I see you," he said. "I've been watching and I see exactly who you are, and I would like to stop pretending I'm not paying attention for reasons that no longer make any sense to me." She turned. Her eyes were full and steady. "Then stop pretending," she said simply. He took her hand. He didn't let go. The soldier who had survived everything finally learned that survival was not the same as living. And the woman who arrived hollow, holding grief like a wound, found that love does not replace what you've lost. It grows somewhere new, in the space that loss teaches you to keep open. Did Alina and Darian's story stay with you? Tell us in the comments, and share this with someone who needs to believe that it's not too late. If this moved you, hit like and subscribe, because our next story is going to break you open in the best possible way.